Welcome to Business Success Tips, where you can learn to make more money in less time and have more fun, specializing to have more fun. Hey, I actually have a friend of mine, Bryan Kaplan, on today with, I love your name, construction consulting. I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? I like that name. Construction
and,
consulting.co.
and there wasn't much thought into it. It was literally just come up with a name, don't overthink it, put the two
How
words
did you get
together.
that URL? That's a winner, man. That's like, good job.
Well, that's why it's .co and not .com. So
I see.
there you go.
Okay, cool. So, Bryan, can you give the audience a little bit of your backstory? So, why should people listen to you, right? That's always a good question. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I fell into the industry in 1999. I went to school for something completely unrelated to construction. Came back. I'm the token Canadian that all of us in the coaching profession know. And I came back. We bought a house, started renovating it, and one thing led to another. And 24 years later, 25 years later, here we are. I'm working as a coach. I own my own business for a period of time. I worked in other large scale remodeling and custom home building companies for over a decade, worked as a carpenter, lead carpenter, a site superintendent, project manager, and last role was working as a general manager, which was, an interesting similarity to kind of what I do now in coaching and systematization and full scale business, structure and, charting the course for where we're going as a business and ensuring profitability and all the things that come along with it, all those fun things that everyone has to deal with.
right. So, why did you decide to be a coach? I mean, why be a coach versus a general manager?
Yeah. So 2018, working as a GM of a company in Toronto, large scale remodeling, custom home building, everything was great. Built a great team. I really had no real reason to leave, but I just been kind of my nature is I kind of get bored is part of the thing for me is when things are actually not challenging anymore. I'm always looking for the next thing. And I'd actually been teaching project management to any of the lead carpenters or superintendents that wanted to advance through the company for a number of years. Wednesday at 5:00, you could come and basically join kind of the curriculum at any point. And, I was meeting with each of our 7 project managers, one-on-one once a week as well, and just really helping mentor and all of that. And obviously I'm not the only coach out there, doing this. But I, had seen that this is something
that brings me to the next question. So,
yeah,
Bryan, what makes you special as a coach? I've been interviewing a lot of coaches, and everybody has
yeah.
their own little take on things. I haven't had somebody that says I do people's past lives, so you never know, right? People have these weird stuff. So,
Yeah. I'd say
I'm up for whatever works for you. So,
yeah. I'd say the biggest USP for me is because, I'm a Red Seal certified carpenter. So I was a physical carpenter building in, minus 10 degrees. We always joke minus 10 degrees Canadian, not American, but
right.
minus 10
Still
degrees
cold. Anyway,
Celsius.
it's really cold.
Yeah. And yeah, super cold. But, so I was a Red Seal carpenter. I was a superintendent. I was a project manager. I was a general manager. I've physically actually done it. And it doesn't mean that someone that hasn't physically done it can't do it. But if you're asking what my USP is, I understand it at every single level. And, every single person that's in your company, I've probably been in that seat at some point and understand the psychology of how they think and how they can succeed and what they like and what they don't like and what works and what doesn't work in those roles.
So I have a question that's a lot of coaches, and that is, our industry is full of craftsmen, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're craftsmen. They're a carpenter, they're a plumber, they're a craftsman, and then all of a sudden, voila, you're an entrepreneur, right? So how do you help your clients make that transition from craftsman to entrepreneur?
Yeah. I mean, the big problem is that as someone that went through a training program, through the province, they don't teach you how to run a business, right? And this is exactly the point is that I might be great at what I do, but how do I actually learn to run a business? And part of the challenge starts with I'd say the mindset of it that we're programmed as craftspeople to just show up and work for, we're worth $35 an hour kind of thing, because that's what I got paid in a job that I was working at sort of thing. And really what you need is an education on how to actually run the business itself. And so I run a program called the Build and Profit System, which teaches, I wouldn't just say the fundamentals, but it's a very comprehensive program that teaches exactly what it takes to, whether you're just starting out or you're at the $10 million plus range, the principles are all the same. They scale a little bit differently, and the level of energy that you have to put in different buckets changes as you scale a business, as you know. But generally speaking, you need that curriculum. You need to understand and actually have somebody, whether it's like myself or any other coach out there, work through it with you and help you understand it, help you actually implement it, because ideas without implementation is simply hallucination.
Right. So, what do you do to people to change people's mindset? I mean, the first thing is they have to stop looking at themselves as a dollar per hour hardworking guy
That's
and
right.
not resenting rich people because they quote don't work and hang out. Right. Some people feel that way.
Mhm.
So, how do you help people change their mindset?
Yeah. So we go through this, we help them understand in a few different ways. One is we kind of use empirical evidence, right? So we look at things like the concept of throughput. So an easy way to think about this is think of a bathtub full of water. Forget about the overflow. All the contractors right now potentially listening to this are like, but there's an overflow here. Imagine you have a bathtub that's full of water. I can't pour more water into it without water spilling over the lip of the bathtub, right? So that's the perfect analogy of throughput. I have this capacity within a year. And these are some of the principles that we have to understand. So there's different ways that we show those metrics. They are mathematical of nature, of course, and we help people understand that. We teach also the free money concept. We teach the idea that you don't have to go and scale to $4 and $5 million custom homes. Sure, if you want to get there, fantastic. But the concept of less volume, higher value per project helps you understand the capacity part and the throughput inside of a year. The other thing that I always talk about more on a philosophical nature is I tell people that you have to respect your business and you have to respect yourself in your business. And this is one of those hard things. If you're a craftsperson and you've just been working on the tools, you think you're worth $35 an hour, but you're really not, because your cost of the company is probably $90 an hour. So, part of this idea is that pricing your work properly makes sure that you're actually paying yourself properly up front, as opposed to taking what's left over, which is the most common thing that especially craftspeople starting a business would really start to think.
So throughput. Now let's talk about small projects versus big ones.
Mhm.
You work with a lot of contractors. What are the margins? There's a couple models. Maybe I'll get your opinion on this. There's the remodeling contractor, everybody's 40, 50%, margin, that kind of thing. And they go, wow, my average project's only $100,000, but I'm making, 40%. Then I'm doing a $3 million house, but I'm only making 15%, right?
Mhm.
So do you have any feelings which is better, which is worse, the higher volumes, higher margin, or lower volume, lower margin? I mean, higher
I
volume,
th-
lower margin.
yeah, I think the thing, and this applies to a lot of different avenues of life, is to always think of it as a bit of a horseshoe. And the top of the horseshoe is always going to be the sweet spot. And every company has to figure out what that is for themselves. At one end, you've got the high volume, low price ticket. And at the other end, you've got the super high price ticket, but low volume model. And some prefer to be at either end of the horseshoe, but some are somewhere along that curve. And typically, you have to find your sweet spot. For us personally, like I've built everything from $25 million custom homes, or I should say $15,000 decks, to $25 million custom homes. And I would tell you that there's pros and cons. I always say you're trading one bag of problems for another in any different scenario that you can kind of
Right.
look at. And I've built plenty of $3 and $4 million custom homes, and that's a different buyer. The persona of that buyer, the kind of 24/7 nature almost of it, it's a different buyer. I may not want to hang out there. A lot of companies find a nice sweet spot between 350 and 550. That's the type of project where you're there for anywhere from, let's say, 3 to 5 months, 6 months max. You can cycle through that. You're there long enough that you can get settled a bit, but you're not there long enough where some of these projects I built, I'm invested with these people for 2.5 and 3 years.
Right.
And by about year 1.5, we're all kind of ready to move on in a
Well, I
lot of
guess,
ways,
you get married, right? So
yeah,
I
you're
guess,
basically getting, I always used to joke that we're basically getting into a temporary long-term
a
relationship.
relationship.
Yeah.
So when you look at
So,
those two, maybe we can have a little debate here. I think the advantage of the smaller jobs, obviously the
mhm.
clients, if you have an argument with a rich client, you're always going to lose. They got more money, more attorneys, you're never going to win.
Yeah.
Smaller client, you got a shot. And also you have less at risk, right? I
Mhm.
mean, not betting 3 million on the line, you're putting 200,000 on the line.
Correct.
But I would argue that the cost of sale is higher, because if you're going retail, you got to keep churning and you got to keep finding new customers to run the machine. And your
Yes.
marketing budget could be like 100 grand a year to keep everything rolling. Whereas if you're doing large custom homes and your 5 best friends are the biggest architects in town, you're sort of done.
Yep.
So do you have any comment on either way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I personally have never been a fan of the high volume business, simply for a lot of the reasons that you talked about. One is just keeping that machine moving is really difficult. I ran a business of 22 people, and that's just it's hard to keep everybody moving, and the amount of energy that it takes. So it was easier for us to go after larger projects from a keeping quote unquote keeping the guys busy perspective. That's a tagline we always hear people say. Is why I took this $30,000 deck project, even though I do $2 million custom homes, but I had to keep the guys busy. From that perspective, like this high volume kind of model just doesn't really work. And but you're not wrong. There's often less risk in doing that. And even if it's going south a bit, it's going to end a lot quicker than this $2 million job that I'm probably on for 12 months, 14 months. Getting out of it is a lot harder than a smaller job. You can kind of cycle through those.
There's also less risk. I mean, a lot of the guys I know have done the smaller jobs. If they lose 10 grand, it's a big deal, right? But if you're doing a $3 million house, you can be out 100 grand just like that, boom, and you're never going to get the money because you can't fight the person because they have way more attorneys than you do.
Yeah. So I mean, the goal is to not get there in the first place, obviously, but yes,
it does happen. Sure. So you've done both. So you would suggest the lower volume, lower margin, but less jobs, creating the same amount of revenue, same net revenue.
I would say that you actually, and this is the free money concept, right? And so just take a simple example, a $500,000 project and a $250,000 project. I always tell people like the $250,000 project is not half the amount of work of the $500,000 project. It proves the point of throughput and understanding cycle times in a year. So whether the margin was the same in each is kind of irrelevant to some extent, but just assume that they are, you can actually in reality do a couple $500,000 jobs much more easily than you can do 3 or 4 of the smaller jobs in the same amount of time. And that's kind of the idea there. So I think ultimately everyone's got to figure out what works for them, what makes sense for them. I think the other thing that often doesn't get factored into this is what do you actually enjoy doing? If you've never built a $2 million house, it seems like this really lofty goal. Potentially for some people listening, it might seem like something that I'm really attracted to because A, I think I can make a lot of money. B, it's a portfolio piece. Maybe there's a bit of ego mixed in there. It certainly was for me. But then go get stuck on a project for a year, a year and 3/4 or almost 2 years and ask, and then ask yourself the question again, was this really what I want to do? And so, and I'm not saying that I changed my opinion on that, but my point is that I think until you really do it, you don't really know. And that's kind of why I say every company's got to find their sweet spot. And, the other side of it is, on point, because we're talking with you and contractor staffing sources, right people, right seats on the bus. Like, how are we structured to actually perform work, right? If I've got a bunch of really strong project managers that can handle $2 and $3 million of annual revenue each per year, well, I can give them each one custom home or one large job and one smaller job and have a very good sustainable business. But I can't, even if you're a great project manager, you can't handle, I hear these stories of people doing dozens of projects, and it's crazy to me. Like you can't do those all really well, if you're managing too many things.
I would argue 2 things. One is every client comes with problems. They just do.
100%.
And so if you takes you 5 clients to do 5 million versus 50 clients to do 5 million, I guarantee the 50 people are going to have more problems than the 5.
100%.
And the other thing I've noticed, and you might either agree or disagree, is as you do higher end projects, you attract more quality people. Like the subs are better. They actually have an office, and the people you hire. So I've noticed as people go to higher end house, let's say, 1 to 2 to 5 million or whatever, you attract higher quality subcontractors and employees than you do when you're doing kitchens and baths.
100%. It's back to the exact same concept of like, what type of work do you want to do? If you're listening to this and you're questioning the type of work you're doing as your own, self-employed remodeling company, custom home builder, like what type of work do you enjoy doing? Well, it's no different probably if you like to do that higher end work than those, trade partners that you're talking about. And I agree with you. You definitely attract a different quality of company, and the work environment just feels maybe more elevated, right? I mean, it's obviously a high-end home. And so there's just like a greater sort of professional feeling, I would say, working in these jobs. And I think that comes down to a lot of like, I was going to say like appreciation, self-appreciation for what you're doing, like being able to kind of like
some ego involved. The other thing I think, one of the problems with lower end projects is your competition can be 2 guys in a truck and nobody's legal. If I mean, just the lower you go down on the spectrum,
zero sum game for sure.
The
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
tighter the competition gets, because there's more people that
Yeah.
can compete, that have two guys in a truck and maybe not workman's comp and maybe all live in the same house. Who what the heck knows? But they can do it, Jack, probably faster and cheaper than you can do it. That's just
Yeah.
the truth.
Yeah. And your client in that realm doesn't know the difference. So selling your value becomes a lot harder when you're racing to the bottom like that.
Right. And also, if you use like Angie's List or those kind of lead, I mean, it's all a bunch of people that it's you're sort of dating in the laundromat, not the country club, for lack of a better term. It's like meet a whole different
Yeah,
kind of person, right?
for sure.
And
For sure.
as I've worked with businesses for 50 years, I pretty much found that in general, as people elevate themselves and go from 1 to 10 million, if you get the bigger projects, you attract the better people, the more you make, probably more money in the long run, but it's just less effort, less people, less
It can
clients.
certainly, yeah, it can certainly get there. There's a lot of companies, I'm sure you've worked with and that I work with in the 5 to 10 range that, they hit those ceilings, all those little pivot points within those
Right.
different revenue ranges. And, sometimes they're tough years, that's
I guess
part
the
of the
good
nature.
news about rich people is they're always rich. I mean,
There's
interest
always a
rate,
market in that
yeah,
side of the
interest
industry.
rates don't matter much, because I've worked with a lot of people, and all the 2 to 5, 10 minutes, they're all cash. Nobody borrows any money
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
Where if you're doing a remodel on the house, right, they got to go
Mhm.
take a loan to get the bathroom done or the kitchen
Yeah.
done. It's a different kind of mentality.
Very,
So,
very true, for sure.
so how would you help people elevate themselves from the smaller remodels to the larger custom homes? If I was a client saying, okay, Bryan, how do I get from the $2 million average size jobs of 100,000 to the, 10 million guy average size job of 1.5 million?
Yeah.
How would you tell them to get there?
Yeah, I mean, 'tis the season because we're talking about annual budgets. And so we're always talking about revenue targets that people have, but we're also looking through the balance of an income statement and asking ourselves, and I always zero in on this one category because it's largely underserved in most businesses, and that's marketing. And to be clear, marketing is not advertising. Advertising is not marketing. They are connected, but they are mutually exclusive. So, but marketing is one of those key things that people really underserve in any of their businesses. And so, um, the important thing is that you're actually appropriating the right amount of money there, whether it's a website, whether it's SEO work, whether it's Google AdWords, whether it's campaign and targeted email campaigns, all of the above sort of thing. And we could go on and on and on forever about it, but that whole bucket of marketing is something that's largely underserved by companies. It wouldn't be outlandish for me to look at, say, an income statement for an $8 million company and see that they spent $15,000 this year in marketing. And that is far too low for them
Far
to be
too low.
spending.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so, but the people that are on the, the lower revenue side, that 15,000, it hurts, right? That's a lot of money. But, the classic line of it, it takes money to make money, and once you've got money, it's easier to make more of it, is kind of the reality here. And so you've got to be clear about where you want to go first and foremost, and then you've got to actually spend in your overhead. People are often afraid to spend in their overhead. They wear it as a bit of a badge of honor, say, hey, I never do any marketing, it's all word of mouth. But the problem is that's not consistent, and it
Right.
won't help you get where you want to go, because the people that you've worked for that aren't those types of jobs, guess what? They know people that want jobs that you did for them, not the types of jobs
Well,
that
they're
you
more of the
want.
same. It's like I was talking to a guy
Exactly.
today, and it's like websites, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I help people work with architects a lot. You never
Yeah.
get a chance at a first impression, right? So if
Yeah.
you're calling on an architectural firm and all
Mm-hmm.
they see a bunch of kitchen remodels
Yeah.
and a bunch of pictures you took with your iPhone,
Yeah.
chances are they're not going to be too impressed, right? It's like,
Well, that's it. Exactly. And so it's funny I say that, you say that, because I remember getting on a call probably a year ago or so, and the remodeler was saying, I hate doing bathrooms. And I said, that's funny. I'm on your website and all I see is bathrooms.
right,
So, and that proves the point. So people hang out in the same socioeconomic pool. So if the clients that are referring you are people that you built bathrooms for, you're going to get bathrooms and kitchens. You're going to get, typically speaking, you're going to get those types of projects. So you have to attract new people. How do you do that? You can't just rely on word of mouth. You have to spend money in your marketing. Advertising, in contrast, is about paid advertising, and that has a
right.
whole bunch of different lenses on it and different things that you can do with it. Again, they're connected, but they can be mutually exclusive. But that's something that's really key for remodelers or custom home builders looking to kind of scale your business. If you're at like a million, there's a lot of people obviously sub $1 million. But if we look at the 1 to 3 million, there's a lot of companies that are in that
Right.
sort of pool there that are hoping to get to the 5, and then they have goals to get to, like, let's say the 10 and even 20 and stuff like that. But a key thing that you said is partnerships with architects and designers. If you want to go after larger custom home jobs, unfortunately, they do have a component of being the gatekeeper to
the
some of
thing
those
is,
jobs.
the problem with that is they've already got a girlfriend and it's not you. Right?
Yes. Yes. It's very true.
I say,
Yeah.
dating like married women is a bad analogy, but it gets the idea, right?
Yeah, no, it's actually very true. It's a very true analogy in every architect, but you stay present because there's going to be a moment in time where it's the right message, right person, right time, and you're going to be the person they think of. And so, I'm sure you've proven this a lot more for a lot more years than I have, but I certainly did it myself. And I've done it with dozens of companies coaching in the last 5.5 years of, your number one focus is architectural partnerships. And we're starting to see it pay dividends in a couple companies right now. And it's a landslide when it happens.
It happens, the problem is most contractors have no patience, right?
Well, that's the other thing that I was going to say, actually, was that when you said, how do I help people, or how do you help somebody get from, let's say I'm at $1 million, I want to get to 3 or 4, you've got to be patient, because it's not going to happen overnight.
Because I've done the numbers, and it takes 5 or 6 meetings and 6 months to a year to get a job from an architect, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And most contractors go 3 times and go, I visited them 3 times. They gave my business card. I'm done, right?
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of, and the way I've built all companies it's always architects and designers, because if you're doing, at least I know residential, if you're doing houses between, 1 and 5 million, people use architects. They just do.
Yeah.
And I think getting to know those guys takes a long time, a lot of persistence. And I think people like you or a coach can help them be patient.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. You know what I always say, Paul? I always say, if you want a great business, get ready to be bored, because you're just going to do the same things over and over and over again. You don't have to reinvent yourself, and you don't have to reinvent, maybe you have to reinvent yourself a little bit, but you don't have to reinvent yourself, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you just have to follow, call it systems, processes, standard ways of doing things, but you just got to be consistent.
Right. I'm sure you coach people like I have too, that, if you visit 3 new architects a week, you'll find one that you like. You're going to have 6 to 10 meetings with them. It's going to take like a year.
Yeah.
And eventually they're worth millions over time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But if you don't have the patience to do that, and I highly recommend you have a coach, it's sort of like you can go to the gym and have a membership, but trust me, you have a personal trainer, you're going to do way better, right?
Hey, I am someone that went to school for kinesiology, for sports medicine. I was an athlete as a kid, and I've played sports my whole life. I still play competitive sports, but I have a personal trainer. I saw him this morning. It's virtual, but I saw him this morning, and we meet, a few times a week virtually, because I guess at this point, I just will make an excuse and not do it. And that's just the reality.
Knowing what to do and doing what is a whole different thing, right?
100%. Yeah. So the patience piece is a huge thing for sure. People want it to happen, whether it's an architectural partnership. And the extension of that, I would tell you, is that if you don't have the patience to meet with an architect 6 to 10 times and wait a year, or not necessarily wait a year, but understand that it could take a year for there to be a job there. When you get these jobs that are $2 to $5 million custom homes, you then enter pre-construction hell. And anybody that's listening to this does that type of work knows exactly what I'm talking about, right? The cycle time of getting these projects from those initial conversations to actually boots on the ground, that's a long time. There's a long period in there, and you've got to be patient. I just talked to a guy the other day.
It was 2 years after meeting the architect, he finally got a job. And then when he got the job, it didn't start for a year because all the pre-construction stuff, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I always go back to this job. We were at the home show one year in Toronto. We met this client, and we ended up doing about a $1.2 million condo renovation. We didn't love doing condos, but it was a pretty high-end project, obviously. But we met them, and really from the moment we met them to the boots on the ground was almost 3 years.
Wow.
And so that's kind of, on all ends of the spectrum, right? Is just the patience of understanding that building a great business is about doing similar things over and over again, and being patient through that is so key.
Same thing with hiring, right? I mean, we tell people you should be recruiting all the time, because if you want to find a project manager, it might take you 6 months, right?
Yeah.
And then people go, well, I haven't gotten you. I go, if somebody comes to you and you're a custom home builder, he knows the architects in town, he knows all the subcontractors, he just quit your competition, you're going to hire the guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't care. There's a position for him all the time, no matter what, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think patience is something that a coach like you can really help people with. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the way that a lot of us do it is, I mean, there's definitely a psychological component to this. And, I do think that as a coach, you need to have obviously a fairly high EQ to understand and read, how your client is feeling. So if I'm working with construction company owners, partners, husband and wife teams, we work with a lot of those. You have to understand the dynamics of what's happening. You have to understand how to push, when to back off. To understand that there's definitely a touch and feel thing there that you really need to be able to impart. Again, it's no different than if you're building a $2 million custom home or a $350,000 main floor remodel of someone's house. It's no different in terms of how you actually read your client and understand what they're going through and, help guide them through that process. It's the same sort of thing here.
Well, it's a know, like,
Yeah.
trust thing, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And it's just, I think you can't be a robot, as a coach, in my opinion. I think you have to have a psychological component to it to understand. I think like the great coaches out there get to know their clients on a level that is, obviously personal, and understand how you can actually yield the best results out of that individual. It's no different when I was working with mentoring my project managers. It was about understanding each one. And, a lot of them had, I guess, a difficulty confronting costs with clients. So change orders is always a common pain point that a lot of, construction companies that come
Right.
to me
Or
have a
for
problem
firing
with.
employees, you need to let go of. Anything is emotional pain,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And so helping each person succeed was kind of something that I really, kind of tuned into. And I do it as a coach, and I think whether you're working as a remodeling company, custom home builder, like your clients need that as well, right? They need to understand. A lot of times people just need to be heard.
Right.
And, then they need to be told and guided towards how they can actually solve their situation or move towards, the end result. But I think you do definitely need to have a level of, that sort of emotional quotient to help you, basically guide
I
people
mean,
that
I
way.
mean, one of the things I found in my, 50 years of coaching is if you push too hard, you're going to get fired, right? Because you push against somebody's comfort zone, they're going to go. The best way to stop from working out really hard is fire your personal trainer, right? They don't have to worry about it anymore, right? On the other hand, if you don't push hard enough, they go, and what am I paying you for, right? Like,
Yeah.
I knew all this before.
Again, horseshoe analogy, right?
Right.
So you can apply this theory to anything. I learned it in third year sports psychology, right? The players out there, you look at like the late great Kobe Bryant, you look at Michael Jordan, those guys, if you piss them off, they would destroy you on the court. But the majority of us, 99.999 repeated percent of us, cannot function when we're in that state of rage.
No.
And so the idea with the horseshoe is that you need to be somewhere around the top of it in the center. And that applies to anything, so pushing
Well,
a
can you
client
explain
as
the horseshoe
yeah.
analogy a little bit, just so that the listeners can understand it?
Yeah, for sure. So basketball is a great example, right? So, if sometimes you're watching sports, right? And pick any sport that anybody listening to this watches, and you watch a player and you're like, gosh, this person does not seem engaged at all. They're just going through the motions, but they're not really like, there's no energy there, right? And on the far end, you see like in hockey, you've got like the instigators, the guys that are always running around and chopping sticks and stuff like that. Or you've got basketball players that are, doing that talk thing, um, and they're just super amped up, but they're making careless mistakes, right? And so
Right.
the idea is as humans, we're wired in a way that the majority of us function best when we're engaged, but we're not over engaged or overstimulated,
So
right?
the
And so
horseshoe, explain that analogy. What the horseshoe analogy then?
yeah, exactly. So at one end, you've got the guy that's not really that engaged, so he's the bottom point of the horseshoe. The other point of the horseshoe is the person that's like enraged, they're the person that's the instigator in hockey or something, someone that's playing with
Right.
too much emotion. And you need to be somewhere in the middle. You need to be balanced. And that's kind of like the top of that horseshoe, right? So the center of the arc, and again, you can apply this to anything, the type of projects that I want. At one end, I've got that small project. At the other end, I've got the really big project, right? A lot of people like to use lines, like the political spectrum, which is actually more of a horseshoe than it is an actual line. And so, but generally speaking, you can use this for anything that you can think of. So in the psychological part of it that we were talking about with a client, you need to basically be kind of a balanced force within that, right? And, so you kind of look at like the trajectory of anything really, and you can apply this analogy to it.
So basically, you don't want to be enraged and you don't want to be not involved. Somewhere
That's
in
right.
between those two. So
That's
you're
right.
involved enough to care, but you're not so involved like you're
Sacrificing your
attached to the
family for everything.
results,
You can't
right? So
sleep. You're so stressed
you're
out that
attached to
you,
the results, so you're
yeah,
pissing everybody off, right?
exactly. Yeah. So, and it's, think about micromanaging, right? That's on the far end of the spectrum, right? If you're a manager and you're constantly questioning everything everyone's doing, you're a micromanager. You're on that far end, right? That far tip. And if you're not, and you're just hoping everything's working out really well, but not engaged with your team, chances are things probably aren't going as well as they should be. So you need to be engaged, but without micromanaging, and that's kind of the
So
same
it's sort of
idea.
like where there's a horseshoe with a bell-shaped curve, same kind of thing, right? You got
Exactly.
to be in the middle. I call it high compassion and indifference, in the sense that you care, but you're not attached, right? That's
That's
sort of
right.
a Zen kind of thing.
That's
So,
right.
so I would, Bryan obviously has a thing like he understands the whole how to work from architects. He's an expert at it, how to get your business bigger, and how to have the patience to pull it off, right? Which to me is one of the most important parts.
Yeah.
So, Bryan, if someone wants to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Yeah. I mean, pretty easy. Constructionconsulting.co. If you Google that, you'll find me online. Pretty active on Instagram, on LinkedIn. Pretty much just search that. You'll find all the stuff popping up on the internet there, and post a lot of content on social platforms as well as our website to help remodelers and custom home builders build better businesses.
Cool. Well, Bryan, I've been doing this for 50 years. I totally agree with you. It's all about the owner, right? If they have their act together, everything else seems to work. But if they don't, it's tough.
Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely.
So I appreciate you being on the show, Bryan. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thanks, Paul.